imagine just burning $10 million in 15 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
And then imagine doing that twice a year, every single year, completely on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of your shareholders, rioting in the streets, they actually applaud you.
Yeah.
And your company valuation climbs.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a corporate crime, honestly, or at least grounds for immediate dismissal of the entire executive board.
It really does. But we aren't talking about a massive accounting scandal here. We're talking about the very highest echelon of the global luxury fashion industry.
Exactly.
To understand how setting mountains of money on fire has essentially become standard operating procedure, we're pulling data from LVMH's 2024 earnings reports, where, by the way, they posted an astonishing 84.7 billion euros in revenue.
Which is just a staggering number.
Staggering. And we're looking at that alongside private financial filings from Chanel, who pulled in 18.7 billion euros in 2024. We're also layering in strategic frameworks from recent Bain luxury studies.
Yeah, and we'll be relying really heavily on a foundational business text called The Luxury Strategy.
Right.
That's by Jean-No Kepfer and Vincent Bastien, who is actually a former CEO of Louis Vuitton.
Which means we basically have the blueprints to an industry that usually prefers to operate, behind velvet ropes.
Definitely. It's a closed world.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to treat this not as an art critique or a runway review, but as a hard-hitting business investigation. We are looking at haute couture because there is a glaring paradox at the center of this industry.
And it's a paradox that almost everyone notices, but very few people actually understand.
Right, because most of us listening to this, you included, only experience haute couture through our phones. We're scrolling, and suddenly we see like Kylie Jenner sitting front row at a Schiaparelli show, wearing a hyper-realistic, life-size faux lion's head attached to her dress.
Or you see a Balenciaga runway where the models are literally trudging through a dystopian trench of thick mud.
Yes. The mud show. To the average observer, those moments look utterly absurd. They look pretentious. And from a strictly commercial standpoint, they look completely pointless. I mean, no one is wearing a lion's head to a board meeting.
Nobody. I mean, maybe a few pop stars, but nobody in the real world.
Exactly. Yet behind the scenes, the conglomerates funding these spectacles are some of the most ruthlessly efficient, commercially disciplined corporate machines on the planet.
They really are.
Think about Bernard Arnault, the head of LVMH. He's not a man known for funding frivolous vanity projects.
No, he is incredibly calculated.
Right. But here is the central mystery. The global customer base for haute couture, the actual people who buy these custom garments, is microscopic. We are talking about an estimated 2,000 to 4,000 people on the entire planet.
And if you speak to industry insiders off the record, they'll suggest the number of truly active, consistent buyers who purchase season after season is probably closer to 1,000 globally.
Wow.
Yeah, it is an infinitesimally small demographic.
So we have industry titans pouring fortunes into an operation that serves maybe 1,000 people. Think about that in the context of another industry.
It's hard to even find a parallel.
Well, imagine if Apple spent hundreds of millions of dollars every year running a massive state-of-the-art hardware R&D lab in Cupertino. They hire the best engineers in the world. And the only products that ever come out of that lab are sold to 1,000 people worldwide.
Right.
And they just keep doing it, decade after decade. It defies every rule of modern capitalism.
It defies conventional capitalism, yes, completely. But when you examine the architecture of these luxury conglomerates, you discover that haute couture is perhaps the most sophisticated long-term brand investment in the history of commerce.
Okay, so it's not a mistake.
No, this isn't a glitch in the spreadsheet. It is a highly calibrated financial tool.
The idea of a hand-beaded ball gown functioning as a financial tool is exactly what we need to figure out today. So they've built this legally mandated money pit.
Yeah.
But to understand how it survives today, in 2026, we first have to understand the origins of the system itself, right? Because it was intentionally designed to operate completely outside the laws of normal supply and demand.
Absolutely. To find the root of that design, we have to look at Paris in the year 1858. This is the origin point of haute couture as an institution. And it was actually spearheaded by an Englishman, Charles Frederick Worth.
Wait, an Englishman starting French high fashion?
I know, it's ironic.
Before Worth, how did wealthy people actually buy their clothes? Was there even a fashion industry like as we know it?
There was an industry, but the power dynamic was completely inverted compared to today. Before Worth, if you were a wealthy aristocrat, you would purchase your own fine fabric like silks, brocades, and you would take it to a dressmaker.
Okay.
You would instruct the dressmaker on exactly what you wanted. The dressmaker was effectively a servant, a skilled laborer, just executing the client's vision.
So the customer was literally dictating the product. They were the designer.
Precisely. Worth completely dismantled that dynamic. He established his own house in Paris and began designing seasonal collections based on his own ideas, his own artistic inspiration.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, he presented these designs on live models, which was an absolute novelty at the time. Clients would come to his salon, sit down, and view his art.
So he flipped the script entirely.
He really did. They were no longer telling him what to make. They were begging for the privilege of buying his creative vision. He elevated the dressmaker from a tradesperson to an artist, and more importantly, to an absolute dictator of taste.
He trained the customer to submit to his authority. And the French establishment saw the economic power of controlling global taste, didn't they? Because they moved to protect this new system remarkably fast.
They recognized almost immediately that Worth had created a really powerful cultural export. By 1868, the French formed the Chambre syndicale de la haute couture.
Which is like a trade union.
Exactly. It was a trade association designed to protect and promote this specific ecosystem of high fashion. Fast forward to 1945. In the aftermath of the Second World War, the French Ministry of Industry took it a step further. They legally codified the term haute couture.
Wait, let me stop you there. It's an actual legal term?
Yes.
In the same way that champagne has to come from the Champagne region of France, or, Parmigiano Reggiano has to come from Parma?
It is a strictly enforced, legally protected appellation. A fashion brand cannot simply decide to call their most expensive dresses haute couture just for marketing purposes. It's illegal.
That's wild. I had no idea.
To earn the right to use that term, a house must be invited by the Fédération de la haute couture et de la mode, and they must meet a set of really grueling criteria.
I pulled those criteria from our sources, actually, and they read like a recipe for deliberate inefficiency.
They really do.
You have to design custom-made clothing for private clients, which requires multiple in-person fittings. You are legally required to maintain an atelier, a workshop in Paris that employs at least 15 full-time staff.
Right.
On top of that, you must employ at least 20 full-time technical workers in at least one workshop. And you have to present a collection of no less than 50 original designs to the public twice a year in January and July.
The crucial phrase within all of those regulations, though, is hand-sewn. This is where the economic reality of couture completely detaches from modern industrial capitalism.
Because you can't automate it.
Exactly. These garments cannot be run through a standard factory assembly line. They are constructed by multiple, highly skilled artisans who specialize in singular disciplines.
Like what?
Well, you have les petites mains, the seamstresses, but then you have entirely separate atelier just for embroidery, or just for featherwork, or just for custom pleating.
Let's do the math on that labor, because this is where the spreadsheet really starts to bleed. If a single intricate evening dress takes, say, 1,000 hours of specialized manual labor, and you are paying Parisian wages and Parisian commercial rent.
The break-even point is astronomical.
It has to be.
The pricing reflects that inefficiency perfectly. At the very lowest end, a relatively simple tailored day suit might cost 10,000 to 15,000 euros.
For day wear.
Yes. But for complex evening wear, prices routinely exceed 150,000 euros. At legacy houses like Chanel or Dior, an exceptional, highly intricate bridal piece or a gala gown can easily top 200,000 or even 300,000 euros.
It's hard to even wrap your head around those numbers for clothing.
These garments represent some of the most expensive non-financial assets a private individual can purchase.
But here's the catch. Even if a client writes a check for 200,000 euros, once you deduct the thousands of hours of labor, the rent for the Parisian atelier, the materials, and the millions of dollars spent staging the runway show at a museum or a palace.
Oh, easily millions.
The house still isn't making a meaningful profit on that dress, are they?
Generally speaking, no. For the vast majority of luxury houses, the haute couture division operates as a loss leader. Or at best, it barely breaks even. It is an incredibly expensive, remarkably inefficient method of producing clothing.
This feels like a massive catch-22. The extreme criteria that make a garment officially haute couture, the manual labor, the Parisian headquarters, the bespoke fittings, are the exact same factors that make the business model completely unscalable and fundamentally unprofitable.
Yes.
If a business model is legally mandated to be impossible to scale, basic economic theory tells us it should be wiped out the moment a faster, cheaper alternative hits the market.
And that economic theory was put to the ultimate test. Because what you just described, the arrival of a faster, cheaper alternative that threatened to wipe out the Parisian salons, is exactly what happened in the 1960s.
The 1960s crisis. This is where the story shifts from a history lesson into high-stakes corporate survival.
It was a bloodbath for the old guard.
So the houses have built this legally mandated money pit. The only way it survives is if the ultra-rich keep buying these ball gowns. But what happens when suddenly wearing a rigid, custom-fitted ball gown stops being a symbol of status and starts being a symbol of being, entirely out of touch with reality?
You really have to picture the cultural shockwaves of the 1960s. The youthquake was in full swing. The cultural attitude toward wealth, authority, and formality was just fracturing.
Right. Nobody wanted to look like their parents.
Exactly. The idea of an aristocrat sitting in a hushed, heavily perfumed Parisian salon for her third fitting to have a rigid gown constructed, it felt utterly archaic. The modern woman wanted to drive cars, she wanted to dance, she wanted to work.
She wanted ready to wear.
Pret-a-porter emerged as a massive disruptive tidal wave. Ready-to-wear clothing was manufactured in standard sizes, it was accessible, it was dynamic, and it reflected the speed of modern life.
And it was so much cheaper.
Consequently, the demand for bespoke high fashion simply collapsed. The traditional upper bourgeois client base that had sustained the great couture houses began to age out or actively shift their buying habits.
The designers themselves saw the writing on the wall too, didn't they? Yves Saint Laurent is a perfect example of this.
Oh, Yves Saint Laurent was pivotal.
He had been the golden child, right? The head designer at Dior. But in 1966, he essentially abandons the strict couture tradition to found his ready-to-wear boutique line, Rive Gauche.
Yes, and he was incredibly vocal about it.
Basically stating that the future of fashion was on the streets, not in the salons of the elite, and then Balenciaga, the master, one of the absolute architectural titans of haute couture, does the unthinkable. In 1968, he literally closes his atelier. He just shuts the doors.
The industry consensus at that moment was completely unanimous. Couture was obsolete. It was an economic dinosaur unable to adapt to a democratized mass consumer climate.
That makes sense.
The expectation was that the remaining houses would either pivot entirely to ready-to-wear or they would go bankrupt.
But they didn't go bankrupt. I mean, the big legacy houses like Dior and Chanel survived the 60s. How? They certainly didn't survive by suddenly finding 10,000 new billionaires to buy couture dresses. The client base remained tiny.
They survived through a radical strategic pivot. The executives at these legacy houses underwent a fundamental realization about what they were actually selling. They realized that if they looked at the balance sheet of the couture atelier in isolation, it was a failure. But haute couture was no longer a clothing business. It was, in fact, a brand mythology engine.
A brand mythology engine. Let's really dig into that.
Once they stopped viewing the millions of euros lost on the atelier as a failure of the clothing division, everything clicked. They realized those losses were actually the cost of manufacturing perceived value.
I see.
The staggering expense of maintaining the artisans, the exclusivity of the shows, the astronomical prices, all of it generated an aura of untouchable prestige.
It's similar to a loss leader strategy, but entirely inverted.
How do you mean?
Usually a loss leader is when, say, a massive supermarket sells a roasted chicken at a financial loss just to get you through the automatic doors. Because they know you'll probably buy a high-margin bottle of wine and some expensive cheese while you're there.
Right. Standard retail tactics.
But in luxury, they're selling a 200,000 euro dress to a fraction of a percent of the population to build a massive, blinding halo of prestige. And that prestige gets the rest of us in the door to buy what?
To buy the sunglasses, the leather handbag, the perfume, the dream.
Wow.
If the true goal of the luxury house isn't to sell the couture dress, but to sell the myth created by the dress, then these companies have to operate under a completely different set of rules than conventional businesses. Selling a myth requires a marketing strategy that actively rejects normal business logic.
Which brings us directly to Kapfer and Bastian. In the luxury strategy, they lay out what they call the anti-laws of marketing. And reading through these anti-laws is wild because they advise brands to do the exact opposite of what they teach you in business school.
Traditional marketing, the kind taught for selling consumer packaged goods or standard retail, is entirely about reducing friction.
Right.
It dictates that you conduct extensive market research, you find out exactly what the consumer wants, and you figure out how to deliver it to them as efficiently, quickly, and cheaply as possible.
Makes sense for toothpaste.
Exactly. But Kapfer and Bastian argue that if you apply that friction-reducing logic to a luxury brand, you will annihilate its value.
One of the anti-laws that really stood out to me when I was reading the sources was, don't pander to your customers' wishes. Now, if I'm running a standard business, my primary job is to listen to my customer. If my customer says they want a blue car with cup holders, I make a blue car with cup holders. Why is listening to the customer a death sentence in luxury?
Because if you ask a consumer what they want, they will almost always ask for something familiar, perhaps slightly improved or ideally cheaper. But luxury isn't in the business of answering needs or solving practical problems.
It's about desire.
Exactly. As Tom Ford noted, during his incredibly successful tenure at Gucci, he would look at market research and then he'd just throw it away. He argued that his job wasn't to give people what they already knew they wanted. His job was to create dreams for tomorrow. A true luxury brand must assert total curatorial authority. It doesn't ask the customer what they want. It dictates what they should desire.
It circles all the way back to Charles Frederick Worth in 1858. The brand is the dictator of taste. It requires a staggering amount of creative arrogance to tell the market, we don't care what you asked for, this is what we are making.
It requires deep creative conviction. And this leads to a vital distinction Cap Furrer makes, which is the difference between fashion and luxury.
Because we usually just lump them together.
Right. In casual conversation, we use those words interchangeably, but structurally and economically, they are opposites.
I see that. Fashion is inherently about momentum and trends. It's ephemeral. The very nature of fashion is that it is perishable.
Highly perishable.
The moment the autumn season ends, that trendy jacket is suddenly socially obsolete, and the retailer has to slash the price by 60% just to clear the inventory. And because fashion is about speed and chasing trends, those brands usually offshore their production to cut costs wherever possible.
Luxury, by contrast, strives for permanence. It is rooted in heritage, in exceptional craftsmanship, and often in a very specific geographic place of origin. A true luxury brand fundamentally refuses to discount its core iconic products.
Because a discount ruins the myth.
Exactly. Putting a luxury item on a clearance rack shatters the illusion of intrinsic timeless value. And this refusal to discount relies heavily on a concept from economics known as the Veblen effect.
Named after Thorstein Veblen, the economist who popularized the term conspicuous consumption back in the late 19th century.
Correct. The standard law of demand dictates that as the price of a good increases, demand for it decreases. The Veblen effect is a phenomenon where the demand for a specific product actually increases as the price goes up.
This is one of those concepts that sounds fake until you see it in the real world. Let's step outside of fashion for a second to ground this for the listener. Think about elite college tuition in the United States.
Okay, good example.
If Harvard suddenly announced they were slashing their tuition to $2,000 a year, they wouldn't become more prestigious. People would assume the quality of the education plummeted. Or think of a Rolex watch. A cheap digital watch keeps better time than a mechanical Rolex.
It absolutely does.
If Rolex dropped the price of a Submariner to $50, the demand wouldn't skyrocket. The demand would evaporate overnight. Because the entire point of buying a Rolex is to signal to everyone else in the room that you can afford a Rolex. The high price is the primary feature.
Excellent examples. The high price is the barrier to entry, and overcoming that barrier is the value. If a luxury brand lowers its prices to capture a broader segment of the market, it instantly destroys the Veblen effect, which connects to another of Cap Furrer's anti-laws. Keep non-enthusiasts out and don't respond to rising demand.
Don't respond to rising demand.
Yeah.
That is so counterintuitive. If a normal company has 1 million people trying to buy their product, they build 3 new factories to capture that revenue. Luxury brands intentionally bottleneck their own supply.
By ignoring what the mass market wants and by actively refusing to scale up production to meet demand, the brand cultivates artificial scarcity. You want people to desire the product precisely because they are aware they cannot easily attain it.
I understand the psychology, but I have to look at the corporate reality here. If you are LVMH, you are a publicly traded company. You have institutional shareholders breathing down your neck for quarterly growth.
Yes, you do.
You cannot run an 84 billion euro empire entirely by turning people away the door. You build this massive well of aspiration by keeping people out of the couture salons, yes, but how do these conglomerates actually monetize that aspiration?
The genius of the modern luxury conglomerate is that they do not monetize the aspiration at the top. They monetize it at the bottom. This requires us to look at the structural architecture of the modern luxury house, which Kapfer conceptualizes as the luxury
The
pyramid.
pyramid. If you are listening to this and wondering where your own purchases fit into this ecosystem, the pyramid makes it crystal clear. Let's map it out.
At the absolute apex of the pyramid, the sharpest top point, sits haute couture. This is supreme, uncompromising exclusivity, the 200,000 euro custom gowns, the few thousand global clients, the millions of euros lost on runway spectacles.
Okay, so that's the tiny peak. Moving one tier down, you have the ready-to-wear collections. These are the garments you see in the global boutiques. Still incredibly expensive, perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 euros for a well-tailored jacket. But they are produced in standard sizing and are much more accessible than couture.
Below ready-to-wear, you reach the middle tiers, the iconic leather goods, the handbags, the belts, the shoes, and fine jewelry. This middle section is the commercial engine room of the house. This is where the truly serious, scalable revenue is generated.
And finally, you reach the massive, sprawling base of the pyramid. Fragrances, cosmetics, eyewear, small leather accessories. This is the entry level. The 40-euro lipstick, the 150-euro bottle of perfume, the designer sunglasses you buy at the duty-free shop in the airport.
The entire economic logic of this structure is that the apex irradiates aspirational energy downward through the rest of the pyramid. The 200,000 euro couture dress at the top is the mechanism that legitimizes the 4,000 euro handbag in the middle, which in turn legitimizes the 40 euro lipstick at the base.
Let's put some hard financial math to this halo effect because the numbers are staggering. Let's look at a mid-tier pyramid item, something widely recognized like the Chanel Classic Flap Bag.
Okay, a true icon.
If you walk into a Chanel boutique in the U.S. market right now, that bag retails for roughly $10,800. But if you deconstruct the actual physical object, the premium leather, the metal hardware, the labor of the artisan in the factory making it, industry analysts estimate the actual cost to produce that bag is somewhere between $700 and $1,500.
Let's take the higher estimate of $1,500. That still leaves a gap of over $9,000 per bag.
Over $9,000 of pure air.
Pure brand equity. When a customer swipes their card for $10,800, they are fundamentally not paying for leather and metal. They are paying a $9,000 premium for what the Chanel name represents.
And what generates that representation? The brand equity isn't spun out of thin air. It represents access to a creative universe whose highest, most visible expression involves hundreds of hours of painstaking hand-stitching by artisans in a historic Parisian atelier.
So the dress pays for the bag's margin. The haute couture collection is the engine generating that $9,000 premium. Without the couture at the apex, the brand's claim to ultimate luxury begins to fracture. The handbag reverts to being just a very nice, expensive leather bag rather than an artifact from a legendary Parisian house. If that happens, the pricing power evaporates.
It relies heavily on aspirational distance. Think about the average consumer walking into a department store and buying a Dior Addict lipstick for 40 euros. That consumer knows, realistically, they will never own a piece of Dior haute couture.
Of course not.
The couture is entirely unreachable. But that unreachability is exactly what makes the act of buying the lipstick feel emotionally resonant. They aren't just buying red pigment mixed with wax. They are buying a micro-fraction of the brand's mythology. They get to touch the base of the pyramid.
When you view the atelier through the lens of aspirational distance, maintaining it at a financial loss becomes a ruthlessly logical business decision. The losses incurred by the couture division are simply an operational marketing expense required to maintain the immense pricing authority of the entire global pyramid.
But I have to push back on this. We live in an era of incredibly sophisticated marketing. Talk is cheap. If I have $1 billion in venture capital, couldn't I just launch a brand tomorrow, price my leather bags at $10,000, hire A-list celebrities for a slick global ad campaign, and just fake the prestige?
It's a fair question.
Why do these houses actually need to endure the nightmare of managing physical Parisian ateliers and hand-sewing dresses? Why not just run a great ad campaign and keep the margins?
Because the luxury consumer and the broader cultural market is highly attuned to authenticity. What you are describing touches on a fascinating concept from economics and evolutionary biology known as signaling theory.
Signaling theory. The classic example in biology is the peacock's tail.
Right, exactly. Consider the male peacock. Its extravagant, massive tail is incredibly heavy. It makes the bird sluggish and vulnerable to predators, and it requires a massive amount of metabolic energy to grow and maintain.
It sounds like a terrible idea for survival.
It is a severe evolutionary handicap. So why does it exist? Because it acts as a costly signal to potential mates. It proves that the male is so genetically robust, so healthy, that he can afford to waste vital energy on this absurd tail and still survive.
Oh, I see.
If a sick or genetically weak peacock attempted to grow that tail, it would literally die. Therefore, the signal is honest. It cannot be faked.
So, mapping this onto luxury economics. A costly signal is an action a corporation takes that is so wildly expensive, so publicly observable, and so structurally difficult to replicate that it proves to the consumer that the business possesses genuine, deep-rooted quality.
Precisely. For a legacy luxury brand, haute couture is the ultimate costly signal. It requires maintaining prime real estate in Paris. It requires employing dozens of highly specialized, unionized artisans, many of whom require decades of training.
And the runway shows.
Yes. It requires staging phenomenally expensive, live logistical marvels twice a year. If a lower-tier competitor tried to fake this, if a mid-market brand tried to genuinely replicate the true artisanship of a 50-piece haute couture collection, they would bankrupt themselves. Therefore, maintaining the atelier signals an honest, unfakeable commitment to quality.
It's the ultimate proof of concept. It proves to the market that they aren't just a marketing shell company pushing out mass-produced goods stamped with a fancy logo.
Exactly.
But it goes beyond just proving they have money to burn. It also generates what the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called cultural capital.
Bourdieu's concept of cultural capital is essential here. The idea is that societal value isn't just financial. It is also accumulated through knowledge, aesthetics, and association with high culture.
Right. If you just have a lot of money, you're just rich.
Yeah.
But if you have money and you understand fine art and you fund the opera and you preserve historic architecture, you have cultural capital. You elevate yourself into a different strata of society.
By engaging in the archaic art of haute couture, luxury brands elevate themselves out of the mundane category of retail apparel and place themselves firmly into the realm of art, heritage, and history.
They become institutions.
They actively associate themselves with institutions of high culture. Think about when Dior stages an incredibly elaborate runway spectacle at the foot of the pyramids of Giza. They aren't merely showing off clothes.
No, it's bigger than that.
They are laying claim to a place in global cultural history. They are visually stating, "We belong next to the monuments of human civilization." You simply cannot manufacture that depth of cultural capital with a standard billboard campaign or an Instagram ad.
There's another layer to this investment that often gets overlooked, and that's the idea of couture as a literal research and development lab. I always think of it like Formula One racing.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Car manufacturers like Mercedes or Ferrari spend hundreds of millions of dollars fielding a Formula One team. The average consumer is never going to buy an F1 car. But the extreme aerodynamic testing, the breakthroughs in engine thermal efficiency, the new lightweight carbon fiber weaves that R&D eventually trickles down to the standard Mercedes sedan or the Honda Civic you buy at the local dealership.
It is the exact same mechanism in haute couture. The atelier functions as a creative laboratory. The creative directors are given ultimate freedom, unconstrained by commercial viability or mass manufacturing limitations. They experiment with radical new silhouettes, novel fabric treatments, and structural innovations.
Let's walk through how that mechanism actually works. How does a 200,000 euro dress help sell a consumer product? Let's say a designer creates a couture dress completely molded out of 3D printed translucent resin. Nobody is buying that to wear at a dinner party. It's unwearable.
It may be unwearable as a dress, yes. But the chemical technique they invented in the lab to mold that specific translucent resin. 6 months later, the cosmetics division uses that exact same resin technique to design the cap of a new $150 perfume bottle.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
The aesthetic innovation has trickled down. Or a complex hand-weaving technique pioneered over 1,000 hours in the couture atelier is eventually adapted by engineers to be produced on a machine loom, and it becomes the signature pattern for a $3,000 ready-to-wear jacket the following season. The creative R&D amortizes across the entire pyramid.
There is one more crucial audience for this costly signal, beyond the aspirational lipstick buyer or the wealthy handbag collector, and that is the investor class.
This touches on corporate governance and long-term valuation. Maintaining a couture atelier signals robust, long-term brand health to the financial markets.
Because it shows they aren't panicked.
Right. Take LVMH, controlled by Bernard Arnault, or Chanel, privately controlled by the Wertheimer family. These entities are managing heritage assets designed to span centuries. When they invest heavily in a couture collection that won't make a direct profit, they are proving to investors and shareholders that they are not liquidating their brand equity to juice a single quarter's earnings.
They are fiercely protecting the golden goose.
Exactly. It is this long-term stewardship that justifies LVMH's massive market capitalization.
So we have mapped out this incredibly elegant theoretical machine. The couture dress loses money, but it acts as an unfakeable, costly signal. It generates immense cultural capital and creates the aspirational distance necessary to legitimize the entire pyramid, giving the house the pricing authority to sell billions of dollars of perfume, sunglasses, and handbags at software-level margins.
Yes.
It is a masterpiece of business strategy.
It is a formidable machine. However,
we have to bring this out of the theoretical and into the harsh reality of the present day, because this luxury machine was built for a different era, and it was optimized during the booming, relatively frictionless global expansion of the 2000s and 2010s. The ultimate test is whether this extremely expensive engine still works in the volatile, highly fractured economic and cultural climate of 2026.
and 2026 is presenting some unprecedented pressure tests for the luxury conglomerates. The macroeconomic environment has shifted dramatically, and the very foundation of the pyramid is under stress.
Let's break down these threats. First, we have to look at the aspirational consumer. This is the middle class or upper middle class shopper who saves up for months to buy that entry-level or mid-tier item. They are the volume drivers for the cosmetics and the small leather goods. But right now, they are pulling back hard.
They absolutely are.
You have persistent economic uncertainty, stubborn inflation, rising housing costs. That aspirational distance we talked about is becoming a bridge too far. If the middle-class base isn't buying the perfume and the wallets, the math of the entire pyramid starts to wobble.
The halo effect relies implicitly on a massive active base of aspirational consumers to absorb the brand mythology and monetize it at volume. If that massive base shrinks due to macroeconomic pressure, the short-term commercial justification for funding the extravagant losses at the top of the pyramid becomes much more difficult to defend to a board of directors.
Then you have a massive geographic and cultural shift. For the last 20 years, the undisputed engine of luxury growth has been the Chinese market. European luxury houses exported their Parisian mythology, and it was consumed at an incredible rate by a rapidly expanding wealthy class.
But that market is aggressively recalibrating.
How so?
We are witnessing a profound shift in Chinese consumer values. There is a surging pride in domestic brands, in Chinese heritage, craftsmanship, and aesthetics. The assumption that a French couture label automatically dictates the absolute pinnacle of aspiration is no longer a given.
So the mythology is losing its grip.
Exactly. European luxury brands are having to work much harder and spend much more to justify their relevance and their massive premiums in a market that is increasingly looking inward for cultural validation.
Which brings us to the most fascinating threat to the traditional couture model, a threat that comes from inside the luxury sector itself. And that is the undeniable rise of the Hermès model.
Hermès is the ultimate outlier in the luxury landscape, and currently it is the ultimate success story.
Let's look at the numbers because they are jaw-dropping. In 2024, Hermès generated 15.2 billion euros in revenue. But the truly shocking number is their operating margin, which sat at 40.5%.
Which is almost unheard of for physical goods.
To put that 40.5% margin in perspective, a highly successful, well-run traditional high-street clothing brand might operate on an 8% or 10% margin. 40.5% is software money. It's tech company profitability. But Hermès is making physical leather bags, and here's the kicker. Hermès does not do traditional Parisian haute couture.
No, they don't.
They do not have a dressmaking atelier tuning out 200,000 euro gowns to show in massive runway spectacles.
They have completely bypassed the traditional fashion pyramid. They achieve supreme luxury prestige without the financial anchor of an haute couture apparel division.
So if I am an executive at Dior or Givenchy, and I see Hermès printing money with 40% margins without spending millions on a couture show, I'm asking a very dangerous question. Isn't that proof that the halo effect of couture is actually an inefficient waste of capital? Why doesn't Dior just fire their dressmakers, adopt the Hermès model, and save a fortune?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question discussed in every luxury boardroom right now. But the answer lies in understanding that Hermès and Dior are playing fundamentally different games, rooted in entirely different brand identities.
How are they different?
Hermès' identity is not rooted in dressmaking. It is rooted in 19th century saddlery, in equestrian gear, and in supreme, uncompromising leather craftsmanship. Their costly signal isn't a hand-beaded dress. The costly signal is the Birkin or Kelly bag itself, and specifically the friction required to get one.
We have to explain the mechanics of Hermès's artificial scarcity because it is legendary. You cannot just walk into an Hermès boutique with $12,000 and point to a Birkin bag on the shelf and say, "I'll take that one." They will politely tell you they don't have any in stock.
To acquire a Birkin or a Kelly at retail, a client must embark on a prolonged acquisition journey. They must build a substantial purchase history across the brand's other categories, buying silk scarves, fine china, shoes, ready-to-wear clothing.
You essentially have to audition for the bag.
You really do. They must cultivate a dedicated relationship with a specific sales associate. Only after demonstrating significant financial commitment and brand loyalty might they be offered the privilege of purchasing the bag from a private back room.
That grueling, highly opaque process is their haute couture. That is their aspirational distance. The leather goods sit at the absolute apex of their pyramid. Why can't Dior just do that?
Because brand DNA cannot be easily rewritten. Dior's entire heritage, its core mythology since Christian Dior literally invented the new look in 1947, is structurally built around the romantic Parisian dressmaking tradition, the silhouette, the fabric, the tailor.
So they are trapped by their own history.
In a way, yes. If Dior suddenly abandons haute couture to focus solely on leather goods, they abandon their founding myth. They sever their connection to French cultural history. They would cease to be Dior and would become just another expensive accessories brand competing in a crowded market without a unique soul.
But there is a real existential danger here for the houses that do rely on the couture tradition. And we touched on it at the very beginning with those viral social media moments. The Balenciaga mud show, the Schiaparelli lion head. The danger is what industry analysts refer to as hollowing out.
Hollowing out is a critical vulnerability in the digital age. If a luxury house begins to view couture solely as a marketing stunt, if they prioritize engineering, a shocking 2-second visual for Instagram or TikTok over the actual rigorous standards of the craft, they risk destroying the very credibility the system was built to protect.
It transitions from being actual haute couture to just being a cynical performance of couture.
Exactly. And the modern luxury consumer is incredibly savvy. They can differentiate between a viral stunt and genuine artisanship. If a house depletes its ateliers to save money, if the meticulous hand sewing is quietly replaced by machine work, if the underlying materials are downgraded while the runway sets get louder and more distracting, the costly signal becomes a fake signal.
And people notice.
They do. And as we discussed with signaling theory, once the market realizes the signal is dishonest, the pricing power of the entire pyramid collapses.
Let's look at the flip side of that consumer awareness. Because changing consumer values aren't just a threat, they also present a massive opportunity for the houses that actually maintain their standards. Think about the massive rise of the quiet luxury aesthetic over the last few years.
The stealth wealth trend, yes.
There has been a severe backlash against giant flashy logos and ostentatious displays of wealth. Consumers are starting to ask real, probing questions about sustainability, about provenance, about how things are actually made.
And this is where the seemingly archaic, labor-intensive model of haute couture suddenly reveals itself as incredibly modern and highly relevant.
If a consumer is going to drop 5,000 euros on a jacket in 2026, they don't just want a recognizable logo stamped on it anymore. They want undeniable proof that the brand isn't exploiting opaque overseas labor markets. They want proof of ethical sourcing. They want authentic, transparent craftsmanship. Haute couture is the ultimate undeniable proof that a brand actually knows how to make things to the highest possible human standard. It proves the brand isn't just a hollow marketing shell designed to sell licensed sunglasses.
In an era dominated by mass automation, fast fashion cycles that destroy the environment, and opaque global supply chains, the ability of a brand to say, this garment was sewn entirely by hand over 400 hours by a named artisan in a workshop in Paris who has had a stable, highly respected career with us for 30 years, that is an incredibly potent, unassailable message.
It really is.
It perfectly addresses the modern demand for authenticity and sustainability. It essentially transforms haute couture from a wasteful, aristocratic extravagance into a vital bastion of human heritage and craft preservation.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've tracked this from Charles Frederick Worth flipping the power dynamic in 1858 Paris through the near-death experience of the 1960s, unpacked the inverted logic of Kapfer's anti-laws, mapped out the halo effect of the luxury pyramid, and stress-tested the entire system against the economic pressures and Hermès models of 2026.
It's a lot to process.
It is. It's time to synthesize this. Let's return to our central investigation. Why do profitable, ruthlessly efficient luxury houses continue investing fortunes in haute couture despite its tiny commercial market?
Weighing all the evidence, we cannot declare haute couture obsolete, nor can we say it is universally indispensable for every single luxury brand, as Hermès proves. But for the legacy houses whose heritage inherently relies on it, haute couture remains luxury's oldest and perhaps least understood strategic asset.
The primary takeaway is that it's not a clothing business. It never has been, not really.
No, it is a sophisticated brand mythology engine. It is a repository of irreplaceable craft knowledge. And ultimately, it is a highly calibrated financial tool that generates the cultural capital and the pricing authority required to sell a $40 lipstick or a $10,000 handbag to millions of aspirational consumers worldwide.
Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. A little something to mull over that builds on these contemporary challenges. We've talked about the threat of macroeconomic shifts, the changing Chinese market, and the push for sustainability. But there is a new, massive frontier looming over the entire fashion industry right now: artificial intelligence and digital reality.
The digital frontier presents an entirely new set of philosophical questions for luxury.
Think about the pace of technology. We are already seeing AI-driven design tools that can generate thousands of breathtakingly innovative, structurally impossible fashion concepts in seconds. We are seeing the rise of virtual digital fashion showcases, where avatars wear garments made of liquid fire or floating glass, sold as digital assets. The creative limit is no longer human imagination, nor is it constrained by the physical properties of fabric.
It's terrifying but fascinating.
So the provocative question is this: could a purely digital luxury brand ever replicate the costly signal of haute couture? If you can prompt an AI to generate a visually perfect dress for zero marginal cost, where is the Veblen effect? Where is the aspirational distance if there is no friction?
That's the crux of it.
If the true value of haute couture, as we've explored today, is rooted in the inescapable physical limits of human hands, of time, and of physical terrestrial materials, then perhaps the digital revolution won't kill haute couture at all. Perhaps, as the rest of the world becomes increasingly virtual, increasingly automated, and increasingly instantaneous, these slow, physical, painstakingly hand-sewn garments will become the most radically scarce and therefore the most valuable assets of the future.
When everything else in the world is infinite and digitally reproducible, the ultimate luxury becomes the undeniable imperfection and effort of the human touch.
The spreadsheet might be broken, but the mythology is stronger than ever. The next time you're scrolling through your phone and you see a viral clip of an absurd, beautiful, completely impractical dress marching down a runway, just remember, you aren't looking at a fashion show. You're looking at the engine room of a multi-billion-dollar machine. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.